Today I'm going to talk about me. Not that I feel any great need to, but someone asked me a question and I thought, well, yeah, that makes sense. He said, "You've mentioned several times that you've retired, but we'd like to know what you retired from." I retired from a job. Okay, I know what he meant. He meant, what kind of work did you do? Okay, I'm going to start. This is going to get into some real bragging. Not that I mean to be boastful, but the kind of work that I did before I retired was database related. For some odd reason, I have a gift for understanding databases. Never knew that I had that gift. Going way back, like 1981, 82, 83, I worked in a bookstore and just got the job. And we had a computer system at the bookstore, but it was an old system, old by today's standards, of course, but there were no PCs back then. They were just beginning to come out, personal computers. We had a mainframe computer, and then all over the building there were terminals, green screen terminals. That's how old this stuff was, with like 24 lines of text to the screen, low resolution, no graphics at all. And I worked in the office. We just got a new operating system to run the bookstore, to keep track of inventories, purchase orders, sales, returns, everything involved as far as selling books, ordering books, and so forth, special orders, that sort of thing. But it didn't work, this computer system. They spent a lot of money for it, like $70,000 on this big mainframe operating system, but they couldn't get it to work. So what had happened was the store was going to be going through a refit, and the staff was told, everybody's going to take 2 weeks off. If you've got vacation pay, you're going to have to use it to get time off with pay. Sorry, but you're going to have to use up vacation time. Otherwise, if you want to keep it to use later, then the 2 weeks off have to be without pay. I don't know that that was fair, but that was the ultimatum they gave everybody. Begrudgingly, everybody agreed. However, I had just started there. I hadn't worked long enough to build up any vacation pay. So for me, it meant 2 weeks off without pay. I didn't want to do that. That wasn't going to work for me. I had bills to pay. So I approached them with an idea. I said, okay, you've got this operating system, this bookstore operating system that isn't working. It should be working. The vendor that sold the store, the system, says it's ready to go. If something isn't working, it's got to be something at your end. Purchase orders weren't configured right. The layout wasn't right. It was a mess. Everything was shelf tags, a mess. So I said, give me a dumb terminal and a modem. And for the next 2 weeks, while everybody is off, I will log in from home and I'll go through that program and see if I can figure out how to make it work. Now, I'm going to tell you a couple of things. I had no prior exposure to computers before. I didn't own one. I had never used one before. I just started working at this bookstore. This was my first opportunity to even work at a terminal on a computer. But it was a challenge that I thought I could do. Second thing is I need to explain is that this was back in the early days of computing when hacking was a good thing. Today hacking is malicious. People stealing identities, they steal your credit card information, your social security information for the purpose of stealing money or whatever, selling your information. It's hacking today is mischief, isn't it? Or they get into secure systems to break into a secure system, a government system, or to steal ideas, concepts, projects that are being worked on by large corporations and so forth. It's bad, right? But back then, hacking was a good thing. Hacking meant to get into a computer system, figure out how it worked, and then figure out how to make it work or make it work better. I read this one article about hacking that said oftentimes the solutions that were created with hackers were more elegant than the original program itself. And elegant was a precious word back then. Elegant meant that your software was written in a very beautiful, logical, easy to follow pattern, as opposed to, say, spaghetti code, which was all over the place. I had been called in a few times over several years to look at other people's computer programs to figure out why wasn't it working, why wasn't it doing what it was supposed to do, and you just run into all this spaghetti code. They'd write something, and then they'd write something else and try to get the two to work together. They'd write little patches, cobble it together, and it was a mess. You can't do it that way. A good program is like a tree. There's a trunk, and then there's all these branches. That's all the subroutines. But you have to have one trunk. You can't have more than one trunk to the tree. Okay. So that's basically what I was going to do. I was going to hack this computer system and figure out why wasn't it working? Why wasn't it doing what we wanted it to do? And how could I make it do what we wanted it to do? So I started reading lines of code. There were all these different files in there. We'll call one text.83.b. That's all I knew. There was nothing in the name to describe what it was. There wasn't even some text at the beginning to explain what the subroutine or the routine did. Back then, every bit of code, every byte was precious, so they didn't waste any computer space describing things. But I would read these routines. They didn't mean anything to me initially. A lot of gobbledygook. But they were in what you might call computer English. I mean, print meant print, for example. It wasn't the final code. It was called source code. That was the English language sort of part of it. Then you'd run that language through a compiler, and the compiler understood all of this program instruction and would create object code or machine code, hexadecimal zeros and ones, patterns of zeros and ones that the computer knew, and it would run the object code. The source code was what you would write. So I'm reading these things. It's routine after routine every day. And as I got through it, I started to see some things. Like, why is it done that way? I wouldn't do it that way. That's not going to fit the way we do things in our bookstore, that sort of thing. One day I found one that, for lack of a name, let's call it text.bp. I remember the BP part. And as soon as I saw that, no numbers, I knew that's it. That's the backbone. That's the holy grail. That's the foundation. That's the trunk of the tree. And the rest of these things I've been reading, those are subroutines. And I knew there were subroutines because they would end with a return code. So the program would send off to a subroutine, it would run whatever it had to run, and then it would return back to the main code and then keep going. Okay, so I started reading through that. Then the lights started coming on. Then I started to see, oh, that's what that does, and that's what that does. All those nondescript text.83.b that I didn't know what those things did, now they started to fit in. The puzzles started to come together. So then, after I understood the main trunk of the program, then I started working up through the subroutines and looking at each one and figuring out, is this going to work for us or is it not going to work? And if it's not going to work, how do I make this work? And a lot of it was really simple configuration stuff. We had a pre-printed purchase order. So it was a matter of line spacing and column spacing to get everything to fit into the right places. I rewrote a bunch of those. And I kept track of what I wrote because I knew they weren't going to run because I didn't have the ability to compile the code. So 2 weeks later, when I got back to work again on a Monday morning, I contacted the vendor and I said, I think I got our system configured to run for us. These are the routines that I altered. Can you check those routines for me and see if they're right? And if they're right, can you compile them for me? So they called me back later on. It was the guy was Stu. The guy I was working with was Stu. And he said, yeah, everything is written correctly, but we didn't know that your bookstore had a programmer. And I said, we don't. And he asked, well, who wrote this code? I did. You're not a programmer? No. How did you know how to write this code? And then I surprised him. I said, by reading your code. And I'll never forget what he said to me, because this was better than anything. He said, you're good. So they compiled it. We started using it. It started working. So then the director of the bookstore, he flew me to the vendor's outlet, their offices in another state, to go to school, basically. They would have these periodic seminars where they would teach people how to use their software. And I was enrolled in one of their classes to learn how to use it. Well, by this point, I already knew it inside out. I knew what it did. I was, at this point, filling in the blanks. There were holes in my knowledge, of course. Then on breaks, each day, I would sit down with the programmers, and I would ask, what does this code do? What does that code do? How do I do this? How do I do that? And the programmers would tell me how to write different types of code to get the computer to do what I wanted it to do. Okay, at the end of the week, the following Monday, I show up back at the bookstore, and the systems administrator, the guy that ran the mainframe computer, which is in another department actually, but he came to me and he said, what did you tell those people at the home office? And I'm like, what? They gave you full developer rights over their software. I don't even have that level of access. Now, he wasn't complaining and he wasn't jealous or anything. He was a really nice guy. This was his way of saying, congratulations, Dennis. You really made your mark. So from that point forward, for the rest of the time that I worked there, that was my baby. Everything, I took care of everything. I ran that computer's program, and if something needed to be adjusted, I would go in there. I even learned how to do ad hoc reporting. In case something didn't seem to make sense, I could run a report and say, oh yeah, here it is. This is where the mistake is, and I could fix things. That was my baby. And that's how it all got started. Now, I didn't work there for very long. Some things happened, some office politics. Some people get jealous if you know more than they do. So I wouldn't say pressured into leaving, but a lot of stress was put on me to the point where I just had no alternative, but I gave my notice and I left, which was fine. But then I got a job elsewhere, and that's what I did for the next many years, was database work. I did programming. I maintained database systems. I was a consultant for other departments, programs that weren't configured properly, and they wanted me to see if I could fix it. And most of the time I couldn't. These programs had to be completely rewritten, and I wasn't about to do it. They didn't want to pay me to do it. But that's what I did. And I maintained a major, huge database system. I worked at a university, and it wasn't even our home system. It was at a central location. All the branches of the university, as well as an even larger university with more numbers of branches, they attached to this. It was like an academic course equivalency system that was of use to all of these schools throughout the state. And I maintained only our portion of it. I didn't work at the home office. I just maintained our university's portion, our data that we stored on that system. But I made sure that it was compatible with what everybody else was trying to do. That was part of the job. And that's what I did every day, and I got really good at it. It kept me busy, but it was easy. It was easy. I even got to the point where I knew there were routines that I could run that it would do some jobs for me, so I wouldn't have to do them. Just made it easier. Again, it kept me busy, but it was like enough work for one person to do.